Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Light of the World webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about how to teach the simple past tense verbs. And the simple past tense is used a lot. It's used all the time for events that ended in the past. And we have to be careful because there are other past tense. We're going to be talking in future webinars about the past perfect and the past continuous. But one of the things that students sometimes get confused is the past and the present perfect progressive. So remember that if we're talking about something that ended in the past, we typically use the simple past tense. But if we are talking about something that started in the past and continues up until now, like I have been teaching for more than 20 years, that's the present perfect progressive. And that's a little more complex. We don't teach that at the A1 level, although students may run into it. So what you need to know about the simple past tense is, first of all, most verbs add the letters ed at the end to form the simple past. So I worked yesterday with an ed, or we visited my grandparents with an ed at the end. However, most of, or many of the most common verbs have irregular forms in the past tense. That means they do not add ed. They have a different way of forming the past. And so you'll notice in the appendix slides of your each Light of the World lesson, there is a link where you can see a list of the 50 most common irregular verbs. And we recommend that you have your students study those and start memorizing them as soon as possible. Here are some examples of the irregular verbs. So the word go changes to went, see changes to saw, eat changes to ate. So you can see there's very different forms from the present and the past in those irregular verbs, and they need to be memorized. So one way we can introduce these past tense verbs is through our Bible readings. Much of the Bible is written in the past tense because it's relating stories and events that happened in the past. So there's no shortage of past tense verbs that you can find. I really like this passage from Psalm 40 because we can bring it into our students' real needs right now. Often we feel that we are crying out to the Lord for help. Often we feel that we're stuck in some sort of muddy pit and can't get out. And this Psalm 40, talks about that feeling. So we can start out by asking our students, when have you felt like you were stuck? When have you cried out to the Lord for help? And then as we read this passage, we can ask students to listen to it, and then we'll find the past simple verbs in it. So first, we'll read it. I called to the Lord and he heard me. He heard my cries. He lifted me out of the grave. He lifted me from that muddy place. He picked me up, put me on solid ground, and kept my feet from slipping. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see what he did and worship him. They will put their trust in the Lord. And so we can just reflect on that, see if students have comments that they want to talk about on that. And then we can ask them to find and circle the past simple verbs. So if we are working in class, you can have them circle it on their paper or up on the board. If we're teaching on Zoom, you can use your annotation tools, and we can go around and ask them to circle those words. So as I'm going through this, I see called is one of those past tense verbs. Heard is another one. Here we have heard again. Lifted, lifted, picked, put, kept, put, see, will see is in the future tense, but did is in the simple past tense, and will put is in the future tense. So we can have students see that, see what they find. And then to show them some of the patterns in this, we can look at the verbs that we've circled and kind of put them into two columns. So one of them is the ED column, if they end in an ED, and the other one's the irregular column. And so we can write those out, and we can see that called, lifted, picked, end with ED, but then heard, put, kept, and did are irregular. And so we can start to talk about those different forms of regular and irregular simple past tense verbs. Once we've done that, and I'm going to go ahead and clear these annotations. We can start to talk about when we use the simple past and some words that are collocations that go along with the simple past. So the words yesterday, obviously that's a common one. And so when we're talking about this, often I will use gestures as well to indicate yesterday. I kind of point over my shoulder, and I might say something like, today I'm working, or every day I work. Yesterday I, and then I'll point over my shoulder to elicit them to say worked. Yes, that's right. Yesterday I worked. Last is another one of those key words. So we can say every week I eat breakfast. I eat oatmeal for breakfast, but last week I ate bacon and eggs. So we can show again a contrast between what we do every day, which is the simple present tense, and yesterday, which is the simple past tense. So all of those words, last week, last month, last year, or ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 days ago, 2 years ago, I traveled, I visited, I saw. Also with the word when, so when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child. Or when I lived in Australia, I was near the sea. So when is another one of those clue words. And so we can talk about those, and those are clues when they should be using the past tense. This is one of the charts that we see. We actually don't formally start teaching the past tense until lesson 40 of the A1 level in Light of the World, but students are going to run into it way before then, because a lot of the Bible stories have past tense. And so you'll often find that students are going to be introduced to concepts before we fully explain them and teach them. And that's just because there's so many different forms and vocabulary that you're constantly running into in English that we don't try to teach them everything at once. So by the time they do get to this lesson, they are a little bit familiar with the past tense. And so they will understand things. One thing that's important to know in the simple past is for questions, we use the word did, and then we just use the base form of the word. So we say, did you work yesterday? So with the question, we don't need to have ed at the end of this word or use it in the past tense. It's just used in the basic base form. And the nice thing about the simple past, in contrast to the simple present, is there's no change in the person. So in simple present, we have I work, you work, he works with an S. In the simple past, it's nice because there's no differentiation. It's the same form for every person. All right, so that's for questions, we use did. We can also add W questions in front of that, like when did you work, where did you work, but did is going to be used with the question. And then the negative is going to be did not, or more commonly in spoken speech, didn't. And again, the verb is still in that base form. It's not worked with an ed, it's just work. I didn't work yesterday. However, the affirmative, when we're answering a question with yes, or we're just talking about something in a positive sense, then it does have that past tense form. So I worked yesterday. He bought a small meal. They saw a young man. So that is when the different forms of the verbs come in. It's in that affirmative form. And so it's important that they know that difference. Now, one thing that's a little bit tricky is the pronunciation of the ed endings. There are actually 3 ways to pronounce an ed language, an ed ending, but at the A1 level, we just introduce the 2 basic forms. It's either pronounced as a small d sound at the end, or it's pronounced as an extra syllable id. So for example, the word clean becomes cleaned, close, closed, learn, learned, love, loved, try, tried. So notice that D ending is very faint. It's not cleaned, it's just cleaned. It's barely enunciated. And actually the other form, which we'll start to teach at the A2 level, is if it follows a non-voiced sound, instead of a D, it's a little T sound. But there's such a small distinction between the D and the T sound at the end that for the A1 level, it's close enough. We're just trying to get them to hear if it has an extra syllable or not. So these words, if a word already ends in a D sound or a T sound, to differentiate it in the past tense, we add an extra syllable. So end changes to ended, hate, hated, need, needed, wait, waited, want, wanted. It's very important that we teach them that to look out for that D or T, listen for the D or T sound at the end, and then the past tense gets an extra syllable to differentiate it from the present tense. For many students, for example, my Spanish and Portuguese speaking students, they want to put an extra syllable on all of the words that end with an ED. And so it's really hard to break them of that habit. And you'll need a lot of practice on that. So we have some sample sentences here. We can have the students read. My brother cleaned his shoes. She wanted to go shopping. Now with spelling of the ed endings, for most words, we just add ed at the end. So work becomes worked, help, helped, visit, visited, play, played. Very simple, just add ed at the very end. For words that already end in a silent E, you just have to add a D. So close, closed, love, loved, dance, danced, smile, smiled. And for words that end with a consonant followed by a Y, we're going to change the Y to I-E-D. So marry, married, studied. Oops, that should be studied with a D. Carry, carried, try, tried. If a stressed syllable, so this other one, I don't usually teach this at the A1 level, but just so you know, there are a few words. If a stressed syllable ends with a consonant and then a vowel and another consonant, you double that final consonant. So like stop becomes stopped with 2 P's, ban becomes banned with 2 N's, mop becomes mopped with 2 P's. There's also a differentiation from the British English and the American English spelling on words like travel that end with an L. All right. And then as we are teaching the irregular verbs, it's great to have them listen to those sounds, repeat them, and start to use them in simple sentences. Hi, Pat. Welcome. So we have some sentences here. I bought 2 hot drinks. We did a big job. They went to the small house. I had a big breakfast. He said the cup was empty. We saw the soft sofa. And so they get used to hearing and seeing those words. We can do some grammar drills or set the irregular verbs to music. I've often taught the irregular words by setting it to the tune for Frere Jacques. So we will sing hide, hid, hidden, ride, rid, ridden, ring, rang, rung, sing, sang, sung. And that helps them memorize all 3 forms of the verbs that are irregular: the base form, the past simple past, and the past participle. Although they don't start using the past participle till a little bit later, they will need to know it eventually. So it's nice to have them memorize those in groups of 3. So we can start to get them to use these to talk about their own personal experiences. And so we use exercises like this, where we'll be swapping out the words in blue and students can substitute their own words. So what did you have to drink this morning? I had hot coffee. What did you buy yesterday? I bought a soft pillow. And then you might change it to, what did you have to eat this morning? I had oatmeal. What did you see yesterday? I saw a movie. So that gives them some help, some practice with doing those. And we can start out with really simple and common verbs to do that. Another thing we'll do is use pictures. So we often have in the lessons pictures of people doing different activities, and we'll have them look at these pictures. and then answer the questions about them. So they can practice asking the questions using the W words with did. So what did she say? And then the student can respond, she said, I love my family. What did she do? She went shopping. What did she have? She had food in her shopping cart. So they can start to make sentences about that and then start talking about their own day using those same past tense verbs. And so finally, I have some examples of sentences that have common mistakes. And so you can see here, each of these have mistakes that students often make. For example, in number 1, we've got, I work in New York for 2 years. And so a lot of times students will think that to make the past tense, they just put was in front of the verb. So you'll hear that sometimes, but we have to tell them, no, it's not was work, it's worked, right? We need to put that ed at the end of the verb. And sometimes they will do that because they've heard the phrase, I was working, which is a good form, but it needs the ing, not the base form or the ed. Or another common mistake we see for number 2, it'll be, did he worked yesterday? And we have to remind them that since we already have the first verb, did, in the past tense, the second verb can just be in the base form, work. Number 3 is really common. He writed a letter. So once students learn that ed makes the past tense, they often over apply that rule to every verb they encounter. And so then we have to show them, no, it's not righted. Righted is an irregular verb. You can have them look it up on their irregular verb chart, and it should be wrote. He wrote a letter. Also with the negatives, we'll have the same problem. Sometimes they'll use the past tense, even though they're using the negative here, they're putting the verb, the second verb, in the past tense. And again, we remind them, since we have the first verb is already in the past tense, the second verb is going to be in the base form. So that's going to be sing. He didn't sing the song. Another one they might do, especially with the word do, they'll say, I didn't my homework. Or sometimes they'll say, or often they'll say, I didn't make my homework, but sometimes they'll just leave out the verb altogether and they'll say, I didn't my homework. And you have to tell them, nope, we still need to put that verb in there. It's going to be, I didn't do my homework. I didn't do my homework. So the first verb is in the past tense. The second verb is going to be in the base form. Number 6, why did he be late? So on this one, they're kind of getting confused with the rules. So for the verb, instead of the verb be, you could say, why did he arrive late? Why did he come late? Why did he show up late? Or you could take out the did he be, and just say, why was he late? Why was he late? Because we are going to, with the verb was, we don't have to have that did there. We can just use it in the simple past tense. And another one, because the verb be in the past tense has two forms, was and were, they often confuse those. So they'll say, why were she angry? It's going to be, why was she angry? Why was she angry? And we can go over that again and practice the singular and plural form. So it's I was, he was, it was, but it's they were, we were, and you were, because you always takes the plural form of the verb, even if it's singular. So I hope this was helpful for you. And we hope that this is going to help you as you're using the simple past tense with your students. Thank you.